Hello students, here we are with the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This is going to be a summary of chapters 32 through 39. Now where we left off at the end of chapter 31 was Huck made the decision to go and try and free Jim from the Phelpses' farm. Now we don't know what his plan is yet, but that's where chapter 32 is going to pick up.
When Huck arrives at Phelps' farm, he is greeted by a woman who seems as though she is expecting someone, and that she thinks that Huck Finn is that person that she is expecting.
Okay, so we begin with chapter 32. When Huck arrives there, he describes it as a little one-horse cotton plantation. The woman that lives there rushes over to Huck to greet him, mistaking him for her nephew Tom, whom she has not seen in years. Huck goes along with it and is glad when he finds out that he is being mistaken for none other than his best friend Tom Sawyer. And in this picture you see Huck arriving and meeting Aunt Sally and Uncle Silas.
So pretending to be Tom will be easy, but what if Tom comes? That would totally ruin his plan. So Huck makes a quick exit, making an excuse to do so, and finds Tom on his way to the house. Tom, of course, thinks that Huck is a ghost, because, remember, Huck killed himself. And so after hearing what Huck is up to, Tom reveals that he will join Huck in the adventure, helping him to steal back Jim. This is a picture that shows the meeting of Huck and Tom on the road, planning to help out Jim.
After playing a trick on his Aunt Sally, Tom tells them that he is their other nephew, Sid. The family all sit down to eat a nice meal, and Huck and Tom try to keep an ear out for where Jim is. They tell the family that they are thinking about seeing the show that has come to town, which stars the Duke and the King. And in this picture, it shows Uncle Silas on the left with Tom and Huck having dinner.
However, the uncle tells them, "I reckon there ain't going to be any, and you couldn't go if there was, because the runaway nigger told Burton and me all about the scandalous show, and Burton said he would tell the people." Huck and Tom say that they are going to bed and sneak out to see what has happened with the King and the Duke. They end up passing a mob of people, and they notice that the Duke and King are both tarred and feathered and being marched down the street by this angry assembly. As they begin to walk home, they figure out that Jim must be locked up in the hut near the house. And in this picture, you see the King being what they call ridden out on a rail, and he's tarred and feathered. Yeah, you can see it.
Upon seeing this scene, Huck feels extremely bad for the King, even though he was the reason why Jim got captured in the first place. To paraphrase Huck, human beings can be awfully cruel to one another. So Huck and Tom decide to come up with a plan of how they're going to get Jim to escape. And Huck's plan is very simple. He wants to steal the key from the uncle and get Jim out and then just go down the river like they used to. And this plan is immediately shot down by Tom because it's too blame simple. Before Huck even said his plan, he knew that he would agree to do whatever Tom wanted, and Tom's plan was much more elaborate. Here is a picture of Huck and Tom together deciding what they're going to do in order to get Jim out. And this is Huck listening to all of Tom's scheming.
So as they approach the shed where Jim is being held, Huck has a good idea to get Jim out quickly. But again, this plan seems too simple to Tom, who says, "I should hope we can find a way that's a little more complicated than that, Huck Finn." So they plan to dig Jim out in the morning, and in the morning they will go to make friends with the slave that's keeping Jim locked up. When they go inside the shed, they see Jim and tell him that they are going to find a way to free him. This is a picture of Jim, chained to the bed, looking sad and miserable.
Tom wishes there were guards to drug and gets bummed out when things go their way so easily. Huck just listens to everything Tom says and does whatever Tom tells him to do. Late that night, Tom and Huck give up digging with the knives they started with and switch to pickaxes instead. The next day, they gather candlesticks, spoons, and tin plates because Tom says that Jim can etch a declaration of his captivity on the tin plate using the other objects, and then throw it out the window for the world to read, just like in Tom's novel. And in this picture, we have some of the tools and equipment they needed, such as the millstone, the spoons, the pie to make the witch pie, and the candlestick.
That night, the boys dig their way to Jim, who is delighted to see them. Jim tells them that Sally and Silas have been to visit and pray with him. Jim does not understand the boys' fancy scheme, but agrees to go along with them anyways. Tom convinces Jim's keeper, Nat, who believes witches are haunting him, that the only cure is to bake a witch pie and give it to Jim. Tom plans to bake a rope ladder into the pie. And in this image we see Nat going in to feed Jim, who's out in the back shed in captivity.
Aunt Sally notices that the missing shirts, candles, sheets, and other articles that Huck and Tom have stole for their plan, and she starts to take her anger out at the disappearances on everyone except the two boys. She believes that maybe rats had stolen some of the items, so Huck and Tom secretly plug up the rat holes in order to confuse Uncle Silas when he goes to do the same thing. And by removing and then replacing the sheets and the spoons, the boys begin to confuse Sally, so much that she loses track of how many she has. This is a picture of Aunt Sally. You can tell she's mad, and the boys are kind of smiling in the background. And she's counting her spoons because she's so confused because they're missing and then they're not missing, so she has no idea what's going on in her house.
So, the baking of the witch pie is a trying task, but the boys finally finish it and send it to Jim. Then Tom insists that Jim scratch an inscription bearing his coat of arms on the wall of the shed, the way the books say. These are all pirate adventure books that Tom is referring to. Tom tries to get Jim to take a rattlesnake or a rat into the shack to tame as a pet, and then he tries to convince Jim to grow a flower to water with his tears. Jim protests against the unnecessary amount of trouble that Tom wants to create, but Tom replies that his ideas present opportunities for greatness. Now, as you can see in this picture here, Jim is crying over the little flower or plant in order to water it with his tears.
Again, because they're following books, the boys trap about 15 rats to put in Jim's shed. But one of Aunt Sally's sons accidentally frees them in the house. They also catch several dozen snakes and hide them in a bedroom, but the snakes freed themselves into the house as well. Aunt Sally falls into a panic over the disorder in her household, while Jim hardly has room to move with all the wildlife in his shed. This is a picture of Aunt Sally losing it over the rats in her house. These are snakes with buttons on their tails, we presume so that harmless snakes can appear to be very harmful rattlesnakes.
Tom learns of Uncle Silas's plan to advertise Jim's capture in the local paper, so he decides to write anonymous, threatening letters to the Phelps family. These letters frighten the family and make Aunt Sally very jumpy. One of the letters warns the family that a gang of runaways is going to steal, and it read, "Beware, trouble is brewing, keep a sharp lookout, an unknown friend."
That concludes chapter 39. We'll be picking up with the continuation of this story and the conclusion of it in class with chapters 40 through 43. Thanks for listening.